Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for joining me for this second webinar in the series that we're performing for the run-up to our first teach of our hybrid class, and I'll have more information on that in a little bit. But this is configuring SharePoint hybrid search and taxonomy. And so again, show of hands from somebody that you can see my screen and actually hear my voice. That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm Matt McDermott. I am a SharePoint consultant, Office 365 consultant, and this screen just kind of has all of my contact info, different ways to get a hold of me. I'm also a Microsoft Office Servers and Services SharePoint MVP. I teach for Pluralsight as well as the World Education Alliance, which is why we're here today, because the WEA is Combined Knowledge, MindSharp, and Critical Path Training all lumped together. I'm also a consultant for Aptilon, where I help my customers deploy SharePoint and Office 365. For this session, we're going to be talking about SharePoint hybrid features, just a real quick overview, not as deep as we went last time. And then we're going to talk specifically about configuring hybrid search and configuring taxonomy to use them together in business situations where you can take advantage of the fact that we now have this cloud-capable taxonomy service as well as a combined search experience between our on-premises content as well as our Office 365 content. So just as a quick review, the features of hybrid that we're talking about has grown immeasurably since the first launch of the first hybrid features. If you're interested in finding out more about these features, there's a bit.ly link at the bottom, and of course bit.ly links are case sensitive, so that's AB videos, and that'll take you to my YouTube channel. And I just launched it the other day, so I think as of this morning, I have all of 3 followers. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about hybrid taxonomy and hybrid search together. All of the rest of those workloads I talked about last time. And what I want to ask you to do for me is to subscribe to my channel. I'm going to post this video, the results of this webinar, on that channel as well. But this is a greedy thing for me. If I get to 100 followers, I can actually get my own URL for that channel, and I won't have to use a bit.ly link anymore. So if you would do that for me, I would be grateful. You can also just go to YouTube and search for Able Blue, which is the name of my company, and you'll be able to find my channel because you'll see my face sitting right there in front of you in the search results. So what is hybrid? Well, hybrid is whenever a company has a Office 365 tenant and one or more SharePoint farms in their environment that they connect together to produce a hybrid connection from an on-premises farm to Office 365. And there are a number of different workloads that you can associate with hybrid, as we saw on the previous slide and in the entire previous webinar. But today we're going to be talking specifically about hybrid search and how hybrid search is going to make finding content wherever it is in your organization much more effective and much easier because we're taking advantage of the search services in Office 365. So the Office 365 hybrid search experience, the goals that the team set out to achieve, there are basically 4 of them. The first is wherever you're executing a search, whether it's your on-premises search center, your Office 365 search center, your phone, a tablet, any app connected to your Office 365 tenant, you're going to get the same search experience, the same results, ranked in the same order. And that's a really powerful thing that this first pillar allows us. The second is that additional capabilities from Office 365 are also available to us. For example, Delve for your on-premises content. So imagine connecting your on-premises environment to a customer database that you also have on-prem, and using a BCS connector, you can crawl that customer content. And then that content also becomes available in Office 365 for use in search centers, for use in customizations, and for use in Delve. Also being able to preview and access the content whenever you're connected to the corporate network. So the idea here is if I'm in Office 365 and I find a document that's hosted in my corporate network, I can hover over that result and use my on-premises Office Web Application Server or Office Online Server to show that preview. And then I mentioned this in the first pillar, but definitely the relevancy and refinement across the entire result set uses the same properties. And so that's one of the things we'll be demonstrating today is the use of relevance and managed metadata or taxonomy to be able to show those results in both search experiences, Office 365 as well as on-prem. So in order to use search, in order to set up a cloud search service application, you have to start out with a hybrid environment, which means that initially you have an Office 365 subscription that supports SharePoint and you have activated users. With that, you've also set up directory synchronization. And I'll show you a slide in just a little bit that talks about why you need directory synchronization. And essentially that's because we want to make sure that our on-premises identity is the same identity that we're using in Office 365 because that makes the search permissions work. Next, we need to set up a search experience. So we want to use a SharePoint server that supports the Cloud Search Service application, which is either SharePoint 2013 or 2016. But then from either of those machines, we can crawl SharePoint 2007, SharePoint 2010, and of course 2013 and 2016. But remember, we can also crawl local file shares and we can crawl BCS connectors. So BCS, even though it hasn't really been updated much in the last couple of years, is still a very relevant technology for us to extend the reach of enterprise search. And then finally, if you want to show previews of your search content from your on-premises farm, you do need to set up a reverse proxy back to your WAC server, which would be either Office Online Server for SharePoint 2016 or Office Web App Server for SharePoint 2013. How do we set up hybrid search? Well, we do that with a video because this is the easiest way for me to show you without having to wait for all of the content to load, because this process takes about, I'll say about, well, it depends on how fast your servers are, but this process takes usually somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes. So what we're going to do is we're just going to run a script that provisions a new search service application. And so you'll notice I have this script called Create Cloud SSA. And the main thing here is when you create your search service application, you set the flag for Cloud Search Service or Cloud Index to true. And when you do that, it's going to stand up it's going to provision a new search service application, but it's also going to prep it to be used in a hybrid configuration. So the second step is going to be to onboard this Cloud Search Service application to our Office 365 tenant. And so essentially all we're doing here is creating the search service application, creating the proxy, and activating the topology. So the next step in this process is to onboard the Cloud Search Service application. So what we're going to do is we're going to run another script. And this is the onboard script is downloadable from Microsoft. And I'm simply going to get my Office 365 admin credentials. And then I'm going to run the onboarding script. And what this is going to do is establish a secure connection to the Office 365 tenant and exchange some certificates in the background to make sure that all of the communication between my farm and the remote endpoint in Office 365 is secure. And so you'll notice there's some search.msit.us traffic manager, et cetera, and those endpoints are now all set up. So once that's all done, we can now execute crawls from our on-premises environment, and those crawl results will get sent to Office 365. And so everything I just did there is done from the on-premises farm. Okay, so we're creating a local crawler, and we're creating a connection to our SharePoint Online tenant in Office 365. All right, so let's talk about hybrid taxonomy, because now we're set for creating a hybrid taxonomy connection as well. So the details of this are that it is synchronization between 2 or more on-premises term stores to Office 365. So what we can do is we can take our local SharePoint farm, where we've already created a term set. In this case, I'm using AKC dog breeds as an example, where I have the herding group, and then under the herding group I have some dogs, and under the sporting group I have some dogs. And that exists in my world, that exists in my local SharePoint farm. You don't need to start this way, okay? If you're not using taxonomy today, then the next step is optional. But in my case, for the demo, I'm going to show you how we start with an on-premises managed metadata term group. And then what we do is we run copy SP taxonomy groups, and that is going to send those groups up to Office 365. It's going to do an initial copy and load of the Office 365 term store, and it's going to keep those 2 term sets in sync with an on-premises timer job. So after you've done the copy, if you choose to, you also have to adjust permissions. And you'll see this where we've set the administrators for our local term set. And so the copy taxonomy groups is going to try to synchronize those user identities for administration as well. Now, remember, this is only taxonomy. So if you're familiar with the managed metadata service, then you know that the managed metadata service is also responsible for synchronizing enterprise content types. That's not part of this feature. This is only the term set synchronization between Office 365 and your on-premises farms. So let's set this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in Office 365. I'm going to start in my local intranet, and just so that you can keep the demo going straight, you'll notice that this is blue and black, and it says SharePoint sites. This is my on-premises farm, and the URL is intranet.adatum.com. My remote Office 365 tenant, I'm going to try to keep the branding orange. So in this case, my orange team site here is the ADATUM team site, and I have a search center in Office 365 that is also orange. So we'll try to do that. So if I look in my term store in Office 365, I can't brand this, but if I open this out, I'll see that I just have people and system. But if I look at my local term store in my local farm, here I have the ADATUM metadata, and inside my local farm under ADATUM metadata, there we go, I have dog breeds and locations. So this is the term group that I'm going to want to synchronize with Office 365. So when you do this, the easiest way to do this is to start on your SharePoint server, which I am remoted into my local SharePoint server. I'm going to open up the Office 365 Admin Center, and I'm going to come down here to Configure Hybrid.
All right, so if you joined us live previously, you saw that we had some issues. So I'm going to try to pick up where we just left off. In my local SharePoint environment, I have dog breeds and locations. In my remote SharePoint taxonomy term store, I have nothing except for the defaults, people and system. The error that I made was that Holly, my ADATUM global administrator, is not an administrator on my term store. So I simply add her credentials here and then come down here and choose Save, which it would be enabled if I had added her previously. That done. Now she's an administrator. Now what I can do is copy my term set. So what I'm going to do is just take these 2 commands, and we're going to paste them in here. It's going to prompt me for my global administrator credentials. And then what it ought to do is detect that my local admin is not an administrator in the cloud, which is fine with me because I now have Holly up there. So we'll say yes. And it's done. That's the way it's supposed to work. So now what I can do is go up to my term store and do a refresh. What I should see now, and I do, is I see the A data metadata, and I see my 2 term sets. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of new terms. So we'll come up here to search, and I'm going to search for United Kingdom. And you'll notice that I don't have any subterms. So let's go ahead and add the 4 countries. All right, so we have 4 additional countries. Remember, these are in Office 365. They do not currently exist in SharePoint on-prem. So the next thing we need to do is go to our hybrid picker. So I'm going to return to Configure Hybrid in the Office 365 SharePoint Admin Center, and then I'm going to choose to open the hybrid picker download page. And that will launch the hybrid picker for me to open. Validate the credentials. And choose Next. The next part is going to check the prerequisites to make sure that my current farm meets the prerequisites for the hybrid workloads that come next. I'm using a SharePoint 2016 farm, so you'll notice that in the next page where I can choose my features, hybrid self-service site creation is disabled because a prerequisite for that is that you are running SharePoint 2013, and SharePoint 2016 doesn't currently support it. It will in the future, but right now it doesn't. So we can run hybrid taxonomy. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the input parameters here. So my local site URL is intranet.adatum.com. My local term store name, this is actually the name of the proxy. So we're going to open that. And then the groups that you want to synchronize. You would do a semicolon delimited list if you wanted to, or you could just leave it with the default, which is to replicate all groups. I'm going to simply replicate the locations and dog breeds that we have in our term set. So that's the A data metadata there. We're going to validate this. Here's a tip, and I'm not sure if this still exists, but I have found that it doesn't validate the local site URL, but it will validate the proxy. So I'll choose OK. I've met all of my requirements, so here I'm going to choose Next. Okay, so once the configuration is complete, you can choose Next. You can decide how much of a kudos you want to send to the team and include your log files. And we're done. Well, we're not really done. What we've done is established a connection, hybrid connection between Office 365 and our on-premises environment via a timer job. So there is this taxonomy groups replication timer job. And if I run this PowerShell commandlet, it's simply going to find it. It's going to show me the timer job. So here it is. It hasn't been run yet, so let's go ahead and run it. And what this will do, and of course this is a timer job. You ordinarily wouldn't need to do this, but for the demo we're forcing the timer job to run. Once this timer job runs, it's going to bring down any new or updated terms from the SharePoint Online term store to our local term set. So let's have a look at that. So in our term store manager, we can search for the United Kingdom. And what we ought to see now is that those terms that we added to Office 365 have been added to our local term store. So let's go ahead and use some of these. Now what I'm going to do is go into search for my search center, and I'm going to search for project. And here are some project documents. I'm going to view that library. And this will take you to a document library that contains the managed metadata terms that we were using previously. But in the case of the previous terms, we only had the granularity of the United Kingdom. So let's fix that by going into Quick Edit and then applying some terms here like Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So immediately on-prem, we're able to take advantage of these new terms. But let's also make an update to Office 365. Go to my ADatum team set here, team site, into my document library, and let's add using those same terms. So just like we did before, we can come back into our document library in Office 365, and we can add some dog breeds to this. So we'll add Golden Retriever, kind of partial, Border Collie, Labrador Retriever, and another Golden Retriever. Now we'll use German Pinscher, that's fine. And then here we have England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. So we have our content tagged in both Office 365 and SharePoint on premises. We have our synchronization working between the taxonomy store in Office 365 and on-prem. The last thing we need to do is we need to reflect the changes that we've made in our local environment back to Office 365. So we'll do an incremental crawl. And when the incremental crawl is done, we'll come back and check out the search experience.
The architecture of crawling, the SharePoint hybrid crawler, or what we call our cloud search service application, is that all of the crawling and parsing is done on-prem. You do need to have a crawl infrastructure set up so that you can crawl SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2010, 2007, your file shares and BCS. But then what the crawler does is it wraps a package with those certificates. It secures that package and sends it up to a work queue in Azure. That work is then parsed into the blob store, and then content processing occurs in Office 365. Now, the beauty of this is that you don't have to support a content processing infrastructure anymore. So if you think about how many servers you have dedicated to content processing, you get to get rid of those servers. The next step is that the access control lists are mapped back to your Azure ID identity, and then we build our SharePoint Online index. So that's why we need to make sure that we have directory synchronization working, because we're using the Azure Active Directory ACL mapping to make sure that we understand who our on-prem users are that are going to be accessing this content. Here's my local search service application. And so if you're familiar with SharePoint Search, this looks just like a regular SharePoint Search service application. It still indicates that it has all 6 components, and it also indicates that it has the 4 databases that we created. But the thing you have to know is that since this is a cloud search service application, it's not running content processing and analytics processing. All of that is taking place in Office 365. What gets pushed? Well, in the search service application, as the crawler is picking up new documents from file shares and SharePoint sources, it's creating these batches that get sent to the search cloud, the search content service in Office 365. It picks up the access control list, the keywords, the metadata, the tenant information, and it doesn't just send one document at a time. It sends them in batches. And so if you lose your internet connection, you will have to do a recrawl. But as that content gets batched up and sent, it gets sent up to the indexing API in Azure, and then ultimately into the SharePoint Online index. Question from the queue is, does the cloud search service application place a copy of the index on-prem as well? No, it does not. It doesn't use any local resources for indexing at all. So why do we even care about this? Well, the clients of mine that are seeing the best benefit from the cloud search service application used to have, or still have, farms around the world. So we have multiple SharePoint farms running around the world. And what we used to do is we used to crawl each other's farms, or we would just crawl the local farm and then have one farm that crawled everybody across the WAN. So that if you didn't find, like for instance, if you were in New Zealand and you executed a search and you didn't find what you were looking for on the local farm, we would have a link at the bottom that said, if you didn't find what you're looking for, let's go to the global farm. And then they would search everything. Now what we can do is, from all of these separate farms, we can connect them or onboard those search service applications to Office 365. And now we can search our local farm if we choose to, but we can get rid of all of that infrastructure and simply send all of the results to Office 365 and search from any location in our environment, from any farm in our corporation, and get exactly the same search results because they're all being served by Office 365. Now, what about metadata? Metadata is the same thing, just in a slightly different direction. With managed metadata, we have a single source of the truth in Office 365, and we can push those metadata term sets back down to our globally located, geolocated farms, and be able to have the same taxonomy experience across all of our properties. What is the logical architecture for query in the cloud search environment? Well, if Cheyenne is in her Office 365 tenant and she's in the Office 365 Search Center and she performs a search, her identity is already verified. So the SharePoint Online Index shows her the content that she has access to. If she's inside her corporate network on a SharePoint 2013 or SharePoint 2016 search center, and she executes a search, what SharePoint does is it passes that request back up to the SharePoint Online Index, and her on-premises identity gets rehydrated with SharePoint Online claims so that SharePoint Online can know what content to show her. So again, this is why directory synchronization is so important. Now, this is if you work in an environment where you have the ability to simply use a single search service application with all of your content in the SharePoint Online Index. If you work in an environment where they will not let you put some of your corporate content into the SharePoint Online Index, you can still do this. What you need to do is stand up a second search service application, the traditional SharePoint 2013 or 2016 search service application. If we have two search service applications, what we can do is crawl the content that's allowed to go to SharePoint Online with the cloud search service application, crawl the private content that can only be displayed on premises in a second search service application, which means that you don't get the benefit of the global refinement, you don't get the benefit of the Delve user interface and things like that, but it does allow you to meet the business need of having some content not shared with Office 365. This also means you have to account for it in the user interface because the search results will not be commingled and will not be relevance ranked against one another. In most time, this is a big step backwards, and so you just have to train your users. But it is possible to do this. It is possible to run with two separate queries. So there is some changes in the supportability of different options available in SharePoint when you run a cloud search service application. The first is that you can still use remote result sources on premises. You can use custom iFilters, BCS connectors, and partner connectors from companies like BA Insight that allow you to connect to content in your local network. What's not supported is any content that requires custom security trimming. In the cloud, you can do tenant-level schema mapping, which means managed properties. You can also create query rules and result sources in the cloud. But what you don't do is you don't do site-level schema mapping. Any custom security trimming is not allowed. Custom entity extraction isn't allowed either. But if you go back to the 2015 Ignite session that Corey Roth and I did, we show you how you can get around this idea of custom entity extraction. I do a demo where I show custom entity extraction on-prem, and then I show you an Office 365 solution that essentially achieves the same business requirement that we achieved with custom entity extraction. So once we get the search services lined up and working, the search experience is actually kind of cool. And in Office 365, I can go to, let's start with the SharePoint tab here. And so I'm logged in as Holly. I'm in Office 365, and I'm in my SharePoint sites page. And so I can execute a search here. So we've seen project documents. So I'm going to do a search for project. And what I should see is I should see some content come up here. And it takes just a second as it loads. And if you were watching last week, some of the new SharePoint announcements that came out are that this page is going to be even more improved than it is now. But what we'll notice down here is I have Project DieHard. This is coming from my intranet. I have Wales at the ADatum team site. This is coming from Office 365. So now that I've started to do this cloud search service application, I'm getting content from both on-prem as well as Office 365. If I come down here to go to the classic results page, then that'll take me to my Office 365 Search Center. And right in here, if you look at the URLs, you'll see adatum274.sharepoint.com. That's my Office 365 tenant, and that's my team site. And then here's intranet.adatum.com. This is my on-prem SharePoint environment. So I'm seeing commingled results for the phrase project. Likewise, if I go over to people, now there's nothing in there for project, but if I go over here to people and search for, let's say, search for Holly, then I should see search results for her in just a second here. There we go. Okay, so no people with project, but if I just do a search for Holly, then I should find Holly. And so I do. Her picture, I only updated it this morning, so it's not showing up. But then that'll, of course, give you links to other people. So this is the Office 365 search experience. What about the on-prem search experience? Well, let's go take a look at that. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go to my search center. Actually, I guess we could do that from up here as well, but I'll just go to intranet.adatum.com/search. So this is my on-prem search environment. I can come in here and execute that same search that we just did, and your expectation is that the results will be the same because I promised you that's what was going to happen. So I'm going to do that same search for project, and if I have that little trombone sound, wah, 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 you'll see that it's not working. And the reason it's not working, if you know the way the search services work, there it goes. The reason that it's not working is because the Office 365 Search Center, it's already wired up to the SharePoint Online Index. So all of that wiring's taken care of for you. But the Search Center in SharePoint, our on-prem environment, it's expecting to use the local result source, which is the default result source. That result source is wired to the search query server that doesn't exist. Because remember, all we did with the cloud search service was stand up a crawler. There is no local query. There's no local index. So what we have to do instead is we have to create a remote result source, and we have to tell it where to go in Office 365 so that we can get those results back. So let's go ahead and do that. Now there is another feature that you can take advantage of, and that's when you're using the cloud search service application. Any content that gets crawled external to Office 365 gets flagged with a managed property called isExternalContent. And if that is true, it exists outside of Office 365. So we can search for content from our on-premises farm by using isExternalContent1, and we can search for SharePoint Online content by using isExternalContent0, or I have found it safer to use not isExternalContent1, and I'll show you that in just a sec. So let's go ahead and fix SharePoint search. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my search service application, and I've already stood these up because I want to make sure that we didn't run out of time. But let me show you what they look like. So I've got these two new result sources that I'm going to use in my search center. The first is called Office 365 Content. And now Office 365 Content is a remote result source. We put in the URL of our remote SharePoint site, and we flag it as SharePoint search results. And then all we do is just set it up with the default search terms, and then I put in the curly brace question mark, which means that if the query is blank, don't return any results. And then we do an analogous result source for our Office 365 people. The only difference here is that we flag it as people search results, and then you have a choice. Where do you want to get your people content from? In my case, what I want to do is get my people content from Office 365. So I do not isExternalContent. If you want to get them from your local user profile service, then you would take out the not, and you'll get them from your local user profile service. Of course, you'll have to crawl your local user profile service. So now that I've got those two things set up, I can go back to, what I can do is I can come back here, and in this result source, you'll notice that right now local SharePoint results is marked as default. I'm going to come up to my Office 365 content, and I'm going to mark it as default. So that is now default, and what I should be able to do is come back to the Everything tab, and after just a few moments, I should be able to execute a query, and get results. And sometimes the search centers are a little finicky and they won't quite do it. So what you can do is simply come in here, edit the page, and the search web part needs to be told to use the default. It should use it automatically, and most of the time it does, but it seems like all of my demos are going badly today. So I'm simply going to edit the search results web part, change the query, and on this query for this results page, see how it picked Office 365 content. I'll choose OK. I'll choose OK, and save and publish the page, and it'll work just fine. Now, there is no such thing as a default people search result source, so we're going to fix that as well in exactly the same way. So here, I'm going to simply search again for project. I'm on-prem, I'm searching for project, and what should happen is it should bring back the exact same results in the exact same order that we had them in the initial demo. If I go over to people, I do the same thing. I edit the page. I edit the search results web part, change the query, and change this from local people to Office 365 people. Choose OK. Scroll to the bottom. Choose OK. And then again, check in and publish the page. And so now my search centers will work with those search results. I'm sorry, those search result sources. And so now I can execute the same search for Holly from my on-premises environment, and it'll query the Office 365. It'll query the Office 365 result source and pull back Holly. Okay. We want to fix that search service, and the way we do it is we create a new default result source using your domain .sharepoint.com, and then the query simply has that curly brace question mark with search terms embedded in it, and that will work for you. The people result source is just a slightly bit more complicated. You're going to choose a people result source, and then you're going to say the content class equals SPS people. And then if you want to use SharePoint Online as your source, then you're going to choose not is external content. Whereas if you're going to use your on-premises SharePoint user profile service for your people, then you would use is external content. So the whole purpose of doing this is to be able to use your taxonomy refiners.
At this point, we have tagged our content on-prem and in Office 365 using our managed metadata values. We've improved the search experience so that when we search on-prem, it actually finds our documents from the Office 365 index, but we're not taking advantage of the refinement capability in the on-prem search center. So let's do that. I'm going to edit the page, and I'm going to edit the refinement web part. I chose two refinable string properties to serve as my refinement management properties. So here's refinable string 00 and refinable string 01. Now you can tell from the data that this first one is associated with dog breed. And the second is associated with our project location. Now a search for project becomes much more relevant to us because I can search for project and find documents and sites across my entire SharePoint farm, on-prem, and in Office 365. I can choose Scotland up here for the project location, and it will refine down to documents from my intranet as well as Office 365 that are using the same refiner to be able to find them. We'll choose Labrador Retriever. And now I have the one document that is tagged with both Labrador Retriever and Scotland. And it turns out this one's from Office 365, but I found it from my on-prem farm. Let me give you another example of what we can do with this level of refinement. I've set it up here as search verticals in Office 365. So I'm going to come back to the Everything tab, and I'm going to do a search for project as I've done before and find content across all of my result sources. But what if I know that this kind of document that I'm looking for is in my local SharePoint farm? Well, I can provide my users with a simple tab or search vertical that focuses just on internal documentation. And likewise, I can also focus on just external documentation in SharePoint Online. So if it's outside my local farm, it's SharePoint Online. If it's in SharePoint Online, then it's not in the local tab. How do we set that up? Or how can we do that here in our Search Center and do the same thing here? Well, actually, it's really easy. I'm going to choose to create a new page, and I'm going to call the first one Local Results. I'm going to create another page called SPO Results. Now, in order to wire these up, what I need is a result source that is pointing at those result sources for Office 365 or for local content. And so I go back into my search service application, I go to result sources, and I create a only local content result source or an only Office 365 source. These are analogous to the sources we created before, but in this case, we're forcing them to be is external content. So this is going to be local content because it's external to Office 365. And the other result source is only Office 365 content, which means that it is not external content. So once I have those two result sources defined in my search service application, from my search page, in this case, I'm in my SPO results page. I can come in here to search results. I can edit the part, change the query. And since this is SharePoint Online Results, I'm going to call this one only Office 365 content. For my local results page, I'm just going to do the opposite. I'm going to edit the web part. I'm going to change the query. And I'm going to choose local content only. Choose OK. Check in the page. Now, these pages exist, but they're not in the search navigation. In order to put them into the search navigation, we have to use Site Settings, search settings. And then we will add a link to each of those pages. Now in Office 365, we called the tabs Local SharePoint and SharePoint Online. So let's match that here. This is Local SharePoint. And we'll browse for that page. And we'll find the local results page. If you want to, you could audience target this content. And let's create the analogous page for Office 365. So now when an end user executes a search, they'll see everything from both environments, but they'll also have a vertical for local SharePoint as well as SharePoint Online. Now you may notice that our refiners have disappeared, and they have because we only configured those refiners on the Everything tab. So if you wanted to carry those refiners over, then you could simply replicate what you did on the Everything tab for each of these additional search verticals. So that's just a nice way of segregating the content, allowing you to use your managed metadata across two environments for search, as well as using that new special property called isExternalContent to segregate the results from one search vertical to another.
So as we wrap up, I promise I'm going to get back to that one last demo, but I got to let the crawl go. I want to point out that I am doing a full day workshop on this topic, as well as onboarding your SharePoint farm to Office 365. Once you've onboarded your farm, then we're going to do directory synchronization, we're going to do search, we're going to do a lot of other workloads, hybrid workloads, in a 6.5 to 7 hour workshop all day. Now this is not hands-on, but it is in a spectacular city. So if you've never been to Harlem, it's a great place to go, and it's a wonderful conference, really, really wonderful conference. If you want to go and you haven't signed up yet, you can use SPRMM464 as a discount code, and you'll receive 20% off on your registration fee. There's also offering a 10% discount using the discount code Ruby's Dad for the full class. This is 3 days of hands-on labs where you get to work in the environment and troubleshoot things like the hybrid not connecting, like I did here. And you can get to the information on that. Again, in the bit.ly is case sensitive, but that's CK for Combined Knowledge Hybrid course. And the July 10 to 12 class is in the European time zone, whereas the 17th to the 19th is the US time zones. So the only reason you would choose one over the other is if your time zones don't match up. I do have some resources for you. I'm going to stay on this slide so that you can record it. But the Office 365 Hybrid Resource Center is a great place to start. They're updating the content. It's been a while since they've upgraded the content, but it's being updated as we speak. There's also a fantastic book, and the link is really long, so I made another bit.ly for that. And again, case sensitive MS Hybrid book. There's also a new Pocket Guide that Bill Baird just announced, which is on that Go Microsoft link. There's also a podcast. If you're an IT pro working with SharePoint and Office 365, my friends Ben and Scott have come out with, I think they're on their 6th episode now, and it's the MS Cloud IT Pro podcast. Fantastic podcast around everything Office 365 and SharePoint Online. Of course, the hybrid class that we've been pitching all along, my blog is at the bottom. And then again, I'm pushing for 100 subscribers on my YouTube channel so that I can make some changes and start syndicating the content a little bit more effectively. And that's AB videos. So there's a couple of questions in the queue. With the hybrid scenarios, would we continue to use an on-prem user profile service application? You have to have one stood up because that's one of the prerequisites for hybrid, but you don't have to use it as the source of your people data. You can start using Office 365 as the source of your people data. That said, you don't have to. You can use it. So that's using a local user profile service application is up to you. And then you could crawl them with your on-prem crawler, the cloud search service application, to perform that crawl. It says, which AD sync technology? Don't use the old dir sync. It is mentioned in the slide as dir sync, but I'm not talking about that specifically. We're using Azure AD Connect, which is the latest version, downloaded literally just a few days ago. Which, if you haven't downloaded it recently, there have been some updates to it. It seems that Microsoft will finally accomplish what Google couldn't, which is crawl and index all the on-prem world. That's the idea. With the help of third-party connectors, that is certainly possible. To add to that, do the 365 result sources have access to the managed properties from on-prem? They absolutely do. And so they don't use the on-prem managed properties. What they do use, if you're going to crawl your on-prem user profile service application, those properties do get published to Office 365. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience today. It's definitely been a tough one for me, but I hope that you got some value out of this. Come back and visit my YouTube channel, and I'll show you the working demos. Again, discounts available for my classes if you're interested, and if you are going to come and see me in Harlem, I would just love to have you come up and let me know that this is how you got there. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.